What's up, everybody? Welcome back. It's been a long while, but here we are doing a video about Egypt, Egyptian music, ancient Egyptian music. So check it. So I recently completed a film, a documentary. I cannot tell you what it is, unfortunately, but I can tell you the subject matter is ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian history, ancient Egyptian archaeology. Okay, so going back that far, you're talking anything from, 3,000 years ago all the way to 4,500 years ago. It's a long time period that we're dealing with here. And we are very lucky when it comes to Egypt and ancient Egypt history because we have so much well-preserved artwork, pictures, paintings that we have found, in pyramids, in tombs, on sarcophagi, I think it would be, and in burial chambers. We actually have a really good idea what musical instruments they played. What we don't know, though, is how they sounded. We don't know what scales they played. We don't know what music they played. We don't know what tunes they played. We know they sang. We know they played percussion. We can see all that stuff. But we don't know, really, what it sounded like. Okay, so let's start here. This instrument is called a lyre. I'm sure you will recognize the shape. It is perhaps the most pervasive instrument of the whole of that period, antiquity, and all of that area, not just Egypt. You will find the lyre everywhere, basically. Ancient Sumeria, ancient Mesopotamia, the ancient Phoenicians, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans. Everybody has played this instrument, and there are versions of it from all over the world. In fact, look at this. This is from a video I did called a Nyatiti from Kenya. Same thing, Of course, it's a different sound. It's played in a different way. But this instrument, boy, it has legs. Now, not to confuse you, but this here is called a lute. Now, a lute is basically the difference between the two. A lyre is kind of a lute, but not really. A lute is something where the strings run parallel across a soundboard. And the strings are either pressed on the soundboard to shorten the strings, or the strings are just pressed in the middle, like in a sitar, for example, with frets, sometimes not with frets. That is a lute. A lyre has a crossbow at the top, what they call a yoke, not woke. And the strings are then attached to that yoke with the tuning pegs on the top there. So the lute basically, as you probably have realized, is the precursor of the modern guitar. This, for example, is a form of lute. It's called a gimbri from Morocco, an ancient instrument. I mean, it looks almost exactly like this picture here in ancient Egypt. And you either change the pitch on the strings by pushing down, or you change by pushing with your nail into the string, but not onto the fretboard. This one's in a state of disrepair. That is basically, by the way, a staple of Moroccan Gandouh music. Do yourself a favor, go check that out. It will blow your mind. And actually, the most ancient lute that has ever been found was found in ancient Egypt. And it's called the Harmonies lute from 1490 BC. Pretty incredible. Found in a burial chamber. So let me show you. This is a lyre. This particular one, I mean, it looks pretty much the same. But this particular one is called a King David harp, or also known as a kinnor harp. This is particularly an Israelite harp, mentioned in the Bible many times, that King David played. Hey, there's a lyric in there somewhere. And it has the yoke at the top, and the strings are running there with no board at the back. So that's why it's called a lyre. So I'm not really playing it here the proper way. So there's the kinnor harp. Now I'll show you another that I have. This too is an Israelite harp, but again, it's the same idea. This one's round, that one's more of a square. Some of them are made with bowls at the back, like the Nyatiti. Some of them are made with tortoise shells at the back. They come in all different shapes and varieties. This is what this one sounds like. So there's the Neville harp. And just to show you the little one, this is also kind of a Kinnor harp, I guess, or King David harp, but just a small one. Now, I knew that I wanted to go to Cairo to record stuff there. Not going to really happen here. It's authenticity I'm looking for, right? You can find brilliant musicians here in LA, but I'm looking for the real McCoy here. So I did a lot of research, a bunch of places, little outfits, little music schools, little groups, and I eventually settled on this group called the Al Mastaba Center for Egyptian folk music. And they are based in Cairo, but they all really come from Port Said, which is just a little bit up at the top there, on the coast actually. And they are an amazing group of people. We did 3 days of recordings. There's actually a partner video to this where I actually interview the two guys in depth about from the Al Mastaba Center about what they do and their history and all that. It's fascinating. You should go and check that out. So we went back and forth about talking about what instruments we were able to conjure up here, and we finally ended up on a list of stuff that I was interested in. And again, nothing in this list is not visible on some Egyptian painting or artwork somewhere. That was basically how I structured this whole thing, really. So first up was the Simsimiyya, a very, very well-known, popular Egyptian version of a lyre. It is different to anything I've shown you here in that it has, well, this one actually has steel strings, the little one, but the Simsimiyya has steel strings. So of course a much brighter sound, and it's a little bigger. So here's a little bit of that. We had a great player up there in Egypt playing this instrument, so here's how that sounds. So here's a cue that I ended up using the Simsimiyya in the score. And then we also did Tanbura. Now, Tanbura is also a lyre, but this is closer to perhaps a Nyatiti or something. It's got gut strings or, nylon strings these days. It's a little bigger. It's just a much softer sound. We also had a great player playing that. So let's go take a look at how that sounds. So we concentrated on the lyre here, but the lyre is also a part of the harp family, right? So a harp that's not a lyre, which we know today is just a classical normal harp, but again, there are versions all over the place, from Ireland, for example, the Celtic harp. This is basically a harp in ancient Egypt, known as a shoulder harp or an arched harp. Plenty of those. We never used one of those in Egypt. I tinkled a little bit on my Celtic harp over here to approximate that sound. And just lastly, if you want to check out someone who really has a handle on these instruments, there's a guy called Michael Levy on YouTube, who really has made it kind of a life's work to build his own instruments, research them, and learn how to play them. He's got tons of CDs out. Worth checking him out. Now, what other instrument do we see a lot of? Flutes. Okay, so there are a million different kinds of flutes all over the world that go back. In fact, it's the oldest instrument that we found evidence of going back some 60-something thousand years. When it came to the flute here, we decided to go with a flute called the Kawala. It's a bamboo flute, very similar to a bansuri or ney. Ney is much more... You find a ney everywhere in the Middle East, of course. I've used it tons of times. But the Kawala is something a little more specifically Egyptian. So here is what that sounds like. And here is how I use the Kawala in the score. And then we have another wind instrument. Again, this is very specifically Egyptian, but you find versions of this everywhere. In fact, I did a video called about the hulusi. It's a Chinese instrument that goes back yonks. It's basically the same technology and a very similar sound. Double pipe and a double reed instrument. So check out the Arghul. Now the Arghul, just it's quite an abrasive instrument when you hear it, but it just has such a unique sound. So this is a cue I wrote around the sound of the Arghul. And of course, like most of these instruments, everyone had a version of it. The ancient Greeks had a version called the aulus. Very, very similar idea. Double pipe with one of the pipes is a drone and the other one plays the melody. Now, before we go further, what am I giving these musicians to play? Well, I just let them go because they're going to know more about this than I did. And I was really happy to hear when we finally started recording that I wasn't hearing... it's just such a trope, right? we think of anything Middle Eastern and you have the Middle Eastern scale, or what's also known as the Arabic scale. This is what it looks like. It's got usually a flat second. Sometimes it's got a flat six. It comes in many forms. And you will immediately go, oh, yeah, well, that's that scale and that's the Middle East. You will also find it in flamenco music, for example. But we don't know that music sounded like that 4,000 years ago. So what I started looking into was how people think music might have sounded. So in 1950 or so, someone discovered on a clay tablet a song that was dated back to 2000 BC, which is kind of known as the oldest song, except it's not really a song. It's a set of instructions for what notes to use, but no indication of what sequence or where you go. So it's a map, it's a template. So getting better than that, we go back to 1400 BC, where the Hurrian, or the Hurrian, I don't know how you pronounce it, hymn comes from. And this is the first known real written down melody. It's called the Hurrian hymn H6, and it comes from what was Canaan in those days, northern Canaan, it's a part of Syria now. And what's interesting is that it's not, you would think something that old is probably going to be just pentatonic, only going to have 5 notes in it or something. And it's not. It's actually a full heptatonic 7-note scale. What we don't know about the Hurrian hymn is, and go and listen to it, so many people have done versions of this, everyone's interpretation is really different. The reason is because while the sequence of notes is mentioned, the melody, in other words, is written, what we don't know is how these damn things were tuned, right? So the melody can be, are you tuned to a major scale? The melody will sound different if you tune to a minor scale. So some people have interpreted that song as in Dorian mode. Some people have interpreted it in Ionian mode or major. Those are the two main. Other people have also interpreted in an Arabic scale. We just simply don't know. But it does give us the clue and warns us against thinking, well, music must have been so much simpler back then, only 5 notes maybe. Because that's what we have found in many cultures where you find pentatonic scales. Africa, for example, lots of pentatonic scales. But it doesn't seem to be the case that that music in this part of the world was based on pentatonic scales, because everything we found indicates it was heptatonic scales. So that was a real breakthrough for me to realize. And then when the guys in Egypt started playing, I realized that they weren't playing only Arabic scales all the time. So that was really nice to hear, and that's why it enabled me to actually write music that could take me out of that hole of, oh, well, now we're depicting something in Iraq or something in wherever in the Middle East. Oh, it must be this kind of scale. And, oh, by the way, let's get the duduk, which doesn't even come from this part of the world. It comes from Armenia. Got nothing to do with this part of the world. But everyone uses it, including me, sad to say. But, Mr. Duduk, I just can't quit you. It's a beautiful instrument, of course. And I have to confess that I did use it for a couple of cues in this movie too, because sometimes it just emotes an ancient feeling. But I digress. And the other thing to remember is, the scales these people were working with wouldn't have sounded like what scales sound like to us today. We have equal temperament, which means everything is mathematically equally divided so that any instrument can play along with any instrument in any key and it works. That wasn't the case with just intonation. Back then, we don't really know exactly how they tuned their stuff, but we can be pretty sure that equal temperament wasn't around. Now for the third wind instrument, here is a Mizmar. Now I think you can already hear why I didn't really end up using this instrument much. It's tough. Double reed instrument, very much like a shawm, incredibly loud, about as subtle as half a brick in winter. Not my bag, but an interesting instrument nevertheless. Now we come to another string instrument. This is called a Rababa. This is a beautiful instrument. I love this instrument. I ended up using it quite a bit. It's not dissimilar to an erhu from China. A beautiful instrument. And here is what I ended up doing with that instrument in the score. So, now we come to percussion. Of course, percussion is probably the oldest instrument ever. And of course, there's no shortage of percussion in this part of the world and in any of these pictures and paintings that we are looking at in ancient Egypt. So we ended up with basically 3 different drums that we concentrated on. Now, what these drums are, one is called a tabla, which is like kind of very similar to a darbuka, nothing like an Indian tabla, even though it's called the same. The other one's called a Duhola, which is a bass darbuka, basically, a much bigger one. Then we have a duff, which is a frame drum you find in so many cultures. And then bongos, which are nothing like the bongos from South America, which is sort of higher pitched, but there are 2 of them. So we did the session with a percussionist, which was great. Ended up using some of that. Take a listen. This is along with the Simsimiyya. So, to wrap up, I had a great time in Egypt. The recording sessions in Cairo, the studio was, look at this, incredible, right? Like, straight out of the 70s. Massive place, and the musicians were just incredible. Go and take a look at that other video with the interview with the 2 guys, because I also play another track with all of them playing together in there that's really marvelous. And, it's just so incredible learning, sitting in someone else's culture for a while, learning about their music and how they tick, and what you realize is we are just so much more similar than we are different. And if we did more of that, I think we'd have less trouble in the world. So this movie, I will let you know when it comes out. I'm really proud of the score that we've ended up with, and I think it works really well in the movie. And being able to draw from this culture and from these particular guys in Egypt has just been a really beautiful and wonderful experience for me. So thank you for watching. Please do like, please do subscribe, and I will catch you on the next one. Mwah! That's perfect.